It might not surprise you to know that I'm something of a comic book nerd, have been for decades, spending my junior high school allowance on the latest issues of Batman or the X-Men. In fact, in particular, Batman's been a favorite of mine for as long as I can remember. He's one of those classic figures, right? He's been around since the 1930s, and there's decades of Batman stories and lore and characters. And most of the time, what Batman looks like is pretty consistent, right? Pretty standard, right? Sort of, here's your basic Batman. Yeah, I have a Batman action figure that lives in my church office. Pretty standard, right? Dresses in a way that looks like a bat, but classic Batman has some rules. Classic Batman, for at least decades, maybe more than 50 years, has had a policy: if he doesn't kill people, he won't use a gun, he won't use the very tools that were used to kill his own parents long ago in Crime Alley. Batman, at least classically, has rules. He will rough up the villains and the bad guys, but he won't kill them, and he realizes that he needs to have the police or the authorities or judges to actually determine final criminal sentences for people. Batman will round them up, but there are lines that he won't cross. Well, in the 1990s, in a time when comic books are going through an awful lot of change and looking to breathe new life into old standing characters, and in a lot of ways just a weird time, Batman went through something of an identity crisis in the comic books. And a crisis happened preventing classic Batman and classic Bruce Wayne from being Batman, and probably to generate more interest and sell more comic books, they had a redesign both of the suit that Batman wore and of who was underneath the cowl. And a new person took on the role of Batman who looked like this. Yikes, this was Batman. All jagged lines, literally guns attached to the gauntlets that had sharp claws. This Batman didn't have a problem with killing people. This Batman didn't have a problem with roughing people up a lot more than classic Batman did. And so in the comic books, the whole idea was to force a question: who was Batman really going to be? And Bruce Wayne, the classic alter ego of Batman, spoiler alert, was forced with the question, not are you going to be Batman, but which one are you going to be? Are you going to be this one who operates with certain rules and won't respond to evil by killing, won't use the same kind of weapons that were used on his own loved ones? Or was he going to take all the gloves all the way off, or have really sharpened claw-like gloves and not care about who got hurt in the pursuit of justice or vengeance or revenge? Of course, eventually, this guy went away, like so many fads from the 90s, like slap bracelets and boy bands, and classic Batman returned. And oddly enough, something from all of that pop culture silliness has stayed with me all these decades later. That ultimately, the question that got asked in that run in the comic books wasn't, should Bruce Wayne be Batman or not, but which version of Batman should he be? If he was going to take on this identity, if he was going to step into it, who was he going to be? How was he going to embody that role? And even though it might seem silly because these are, children's comic book characters, the question is a really good one. If you're going to be Batman, which Batman are you going to be? What does it look like to embody that identity? And I know this might sound silly, but in an important way, that's the question at the heart of Jesus' ministry. And in particular, it's the question at the heart of his journey into the wilderness. We hear in this first Sunday of Lent coming up the story of Jesus being driven out into the wilderness for this confrontation with the tempter. And regardless of the details between Matthew's version and Mark's version and Luke's version, there's this central driving question: what kind of Messiah is Jesus going to be? The recurring question that the tempter, that Satan puts to Jesus, starts out with a premise very similar to the Batman question, right? If you're the Son of God, then do powerful things that we expect the Son of God, the Messiah, to do, right? If you are the Son of God, turn these stones into bread if you're so hungry. Do a show and use your power for self-interest. If you're the Son of God, bow down and worship me, says Satan, and I'll give you all the kingdoms of the world. You can rule and make yourself emperor. You can put the world the way you want it to be by sheer brute force as king of the world. If you're the king of the world, if you're the Son of God, throw yourself down from the temple, and when the angels show up to come to your defense, it'll be clear that you are the Messiah. You'll have celebrity and status and all those things. You don't have to go the way of the cross. It's basically a question of which version of Messiah Jesus is going to be. What does it mean for him to be the Messiah? Will he go the way that the tempter is daring him to, right? Be the kind of Messiah that people want, with firepower and with overt force. Be the kind who can put on a spectacle of a show or who can command the world's armies. Be the kind who uses brute force like the empire does. And Jesus consistently says, no, not that he's not the Messiah, not that he's not the Son of God, but his way of being the Son of God is different. His way of being the Messiah involves a cross. And that's just it. At the heart of this whole confrontation between Jesus and the tempter in the wilderness is the question of whether Jesus will or will not go the way of the cross. Whether Jesus' way of embodying the role of Messiah, of Son of God, is conquering or is suffering, is the way of conquest and brute force or the way of self-giving love. You might know this detail, but near the end of the gospel, when Jesus is bleeding out, dying on the cross between thieves who are mocking him as the soldiers are, and everything seems like it's coming unglued, the crowds say, if you're the Son of God, come down from the cross. And it echoes the very same language that Satan, that the tempter had used, right? If you're the Son of God, do it this way. And Jesus' answer until the very end is no. My way of being the Messiah is to go the way of the cross. Jesus won't respond with evil with more evil. Jesus won't respond to the rottenness of the world with brute force or destruction, but with suffering love. This is the way Jesus embodies the role. And I know it might seem strange, but the wrestlings of comic book characters from decades ago have made me think in those terms. That's what's been going on in the Gospels too. And that really at the heart for us, the good news we have is that Jesus decides not to go through a rebranding, even if it might have been popular, even if it might have been trendy. Jesus insists the way to be the Son of God, the way he has come to be the Messiah, is not to conquer and to kill and to destroy, but to go to a cross for you and for me and for the sake of the whole world. This Lent, we're going to be looking at the theme of love beyond boundaries. And before we even get to our call to love neighbors and strangers and enemies, we start with God's love for us. And that at the heart, the gospel is about Jesus' love that's willing to say no to this way in order to say yes to his own way, yes to the way of the cross, yes to the path of suffering love, yes to the life that gives himself away. That's the conversation we're going to explore, maybe with or without action figures, this coming Sunday. But join us as we begin this coming Lenten season, hearing the good news of the Jesus who says no to some things so that he can say yes to you, even though that also means yes to the cross. See you Sunday.